Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Streamtime Sports. I'm your host Nick Meacham and deputising I suppose for Chris Stone, who is not able to join us for this week's episode. But fear not, you will not just be listening to my dulcet tones. I'm joined today by Steve McCaskill, tech editor, is it still these days, Steve? A tech editor at SportsPro, who's going to help me through this solo effort I'm running through today and take us on a bit of a journey with around the business of gaming, particularly with EAFC. So, Steve, how's it going?
Wonderful. Yes, very formidable shoes to step into with Mr. Stone, and I won't use this as an excuse to give myself a promotion. But yeah, no, I'm doing very well, thank you. Just enjoying the winter of sport now that Christmas is now a bit of memory. Although enjoyed the darts and the football over Christmas, but now we get into the nitty gritty of things that might be on ESPN 8, the Ocho. Plenty of handball, winter sports, and of course the international bowls. So we get very busy.
Yeah, I would say that for those familiar with Chris's interests, which he made an effort to point out his love for darts in the last episode, and also his love for the NFL. Many of those interests Steve definitely follows suit with, but Steve is very much the quintessential lover of all sports, I would say, or nearly all sports. Steve, you have a very diverse and eclectic mix of interests of sports that you follow and keep us up to date within in the SportsPro towers. What's some of the sport you'll be watching over this sort of January period? Is there anything that comes across seasonally that you follow that maybe wouldn't be on most people's radars?
Well, it's the European Handball Championships at the minute, which I had never seen handball before lockdown, but I was looking for things to occupy my day, and it came up on the Swiss broadcaster that Switzerland had qualified for the World Cup in 2021, and growing up in Switzerland, I always thought Switzerland were good at handball. They're not. They hadn't qualified until 1994, but I got into it, and they only qualified for that one because of a COVID withdrawal. But they're back in European Championships, and they drew 26, all with the tournament favourites France the other night, very close to winning. So I guess that's something I've been using as a distraction from Manchester United's awful form. Still watching Harlequins. Very much enjoyed Green Bay's shock playoff victory over Dallas on Sunday night, which was very enjoyable. And tonight, I think in my living room, there's like in millions across the country, there's going to be a battle for the remote between Love Island All Stars and the night skiing in Flacau. I'm sure many people can relate to that, of course.
Night skiing, Flacau. Do they do that in the dark, or wear little spotlights, or is it all? What's the difference there to a regular race? Is it just done at night, like a bit like the F1 is when it's done in like Singapore?
I mean, sadly for safety reasons, they do have light, but yes, they light up the slopes. Really powerful floodlights. It's quite a spectacle. There's a couple of night races on the calendar, and some of them tend to be party races, particularly one in Schladming, which I don't really like the term bucket list, but I do. Going to that race is on there. It's a bit like I think it's the Waste Disposal Open or something in Phoenix, Arizona. That becomes
the Waste Management Open, I think it's called.
Yes,
it's much better.
So it becomes
a better name.
It's one of my favorite, along with the Pop-Tarts Bowl, of course, in college football. It's one of the better sponsors. But yes, it's this party atmosphere, and it is actually worth checking out. And I'm being slightly facetious, as I do love my skiing, but yeah, that is one that I watch out for.
For those that didn't see that Pop-Tart, the Pop-Tart Bowl, I think it was, I read somewhere that it was like nearly $1 billion in Pop-Tart sales happened to the US per year, which is just ludicrous. It's like the GDP of, well, probably like somewhere like Jamaica, where I'm at the moment, and all for just Pop-Tarts. And they did their most incredible activation that you just could never, ever consider seeing it anywhere else in the world, save perhaps somewhere in Asia, which can be a little bit quirky sometimes. I mean, Japan. But what did they do? Was that after the match, basically the winning team got? Can you remember that? Can you explain that one, Steve?
Basically, it was billed as the world's first edible mascot, and so the mascot, this bloke in a Pop-Tarts costume, was fed into a ceremonial giant toaster, and out came this giant edible Pop-Tart, which the victorious team, who I'm afraid whose name does escape me, feasted on this now cooked Pop-Tart. I say this with love, as someone who loves American sport, pretty much everything, big fan of the US in general. It's one of those things I'm glad happens, but I'm not sure I'm ready for it to happen over here. Can you imagine Wimbledon, the giant strawberry? It wouldn't be the same, would it?
A giant strawberry gets cut up in a blender. They put into some ice cream, some strawberries and cream. I mean, that would be. They would have the RSP. I don't know, do you call it the RSPCA? The animal activists knocking on the door. Not the animal activists. What am I talking about? This is talking about fruit here. I've gone on a tangent here. Let's get back on to get a bit focused. Otherwise, I should cut this out. But hey, we don't like to cut out on the Streamtime Sport podcast. People can realise how much of a muppet I am sometimes. Right, Steve. So we've got lots to talk about today, and we wanted to spend a bit of time talking about the business of gaming as it relates to sports, in particular, probably I'd say arguably the world's most famous sporting game, really, which was FIFA, and probably still is in terms of brand, but is no longer, and it's now shifted to this EAFC or EA Sports. I think it's EAFC. They've actually called it now. So we want to talk a little about the history of that, not just for the game itself, but indeed, obviously this is a business podcast, so talking about some of the business components of that and what's gone on behind the scenes, where we've got to in terms of the result, in terms of what FIFA as the governing body has decided to do, and indeed what EA Sports, the gaming games producer, has done. So there's lots to dig into here because lots of sports have dipped their toes and have had quite a lot of success in the gaming space in varying ways. And some others have come and gone pretty quickly. And everyone's tried to mimic, I think, probably a FIFA or maybe a Madden as the quintessential gaming titles in the sports space. So, yeah, lots of sort of interesting stuff to cover here, not just for people who've probably played the game over the years in different various guises, but also because there's a really interesting business behind it all. So Steve, that's a bit of scene setting. Let's talk a little bit about, firstly, just the history of the game FIFA and how it all came to be. How did they get into a situation where a governing body partners with someone like EA Sports and creates the world's leading football title? Because obviously it's been around and had some competition along the way, but it's obviously became one of the tentpole, the flagship product in this space for many years now.
So EA became well known for sporting video games mainly through its NFL and NHL simulations. I guess the back end of the 1980s and early 1990s on the Sega Mega Drive, that sort of era. And it had huge success with NFL. Of course, that was endorsed by John Madden, who basically came on board provided he could have some sort of input and it was as realistic as possible. And so they got him involved. They got the NFL license, and that sort of set the blueprint for pretty much every other sport they would go into. They were able to use their financial might to get these licenses, often on exclusive terms, which crowd others. I mean, not exclusivity wasn't as important back then it is now, but the point was they got that license. If you were playing their simulations, you have the right teams, the right players. It would look and feel as close to the real thing as possible with the technology of the time. Now, EA, being an American company, wasn't really too interested in soccer, but a group of developers at EA decided, we're going to make a soccer game. And they did it almost under the radar. It was such a small team. EA was so uninterested. It was like management weren't really aware of what was going on. And they say that's probably the only reason that they weren't cancelled, because it didn't register on their radar. Now they started creating this game and thought, hang on, this is quite good. We've done this quite well. And again, this is a business podcast; it's not a gaming podcast. But basically, they did something called an isometric view, which was different to most other games at the time, which was top down or side on. And so for 2D gaming consoles like Mega Drive or even PCs at the time, that was quite revolutionary. So they went to top management and said, we want to release this. Management agreed. Oh, this is quite good. But then they decided to go, a bit all management and a bit EA on them. And they started to make some changes. But above all, they wanted a license. They wanted the same as the NFL, NHL. But of course, that doesn't exist in soccer. There is no overarching governing body that controls all that intellectual property. Now, their first choice was the World Cup 94 license. This was in 1993, but what became the first FIFA was released. But that was controlled by a company called US Gold. They couldn't get on that. The idea was to capitalize on the World Cup being in the US. So then, what else can we get? What about FIFA, the governing body? Now, it was an interesting choice because FIFA doesn't have any intellectual property. It does have the World Cup, as we discussed. It already, that had already been licensed out. They just needed a name. They needed that to satisfy management. Now they had some meetings. Again, FIFA didn't know how to value this. Really, I have heard anecdotally that this meeting was conducted over a dinner, basically, and no one's revealed how much it cost initially. So they got the name, they get any intellectual property. The game launched with international teams, no real players because they're owned by clubs, international competitions. And it was hugely successful. Now, over the years, the scope of this license increased, and FIFA International Soccer came FIFA. Went on for 30 years, and they did include real players eventually, but these were through agreements with, like I said, the clubs, the federations, the FIFA Pro, which is the players' union. Nothing to do with FIFA, but FIFA became synonymous with this game. That was the brand, and this was a really good deal for both organizations. For EA Sports, it gave it legitimacy. Look, our product is endorsed by World Soccer's governing body. And for FIFA, it made it relevant to gamers around the world. It was basically free advertising, free promotion for it, and it was paid for it. So it was better than free. It received money for doing very little and receiving very little in the way of intellectual property. So that's sort of how it came about. That's how this game was endorsed by FIFA. It was basically an interesting sort of side project that became this global phenomenon, and FIFA was a vehicle to get that initial legitimacy and get it in the hands of as many players as possible.
And so one of the key the reasons it was so successful, other than perhaps the gaming experience, not that I have played it over the years, but I wouldn't say I've played every version. But there was obviously one of the main competitors was the Pro Evolution Soccer, right? That was its main competitor at a period of time anyway. I don't know if that was just a one-off or I believe that was quite competitive for a while, was like which one is the better game. The difference was, though, one of the big differences was they didn't have the licensing rights. They didn't have the ability to use, let's say, the modern day NIL, name, image, likeness of the athletes and players, which is really what held it back in many instances. Because I remember playing that game and you'd be playing as Manchester Red or Manchester Blue, but you would not play as Man City or Manchester United. And the names all were randomly jumbled, and it was a little bit confusing. And that sort of realism, we talk about a lot, even in the modern day, right, with gaming, that the strive to be as real as possible. That feels like that was such an important move by EA Sports to get that those naming rights in place. I guess that was all with FIFA Pro, was your point, right? That had to be done with them, not with the governing body itself.
Well, I can tell you that, Pro Evo was the better game for many years as someone who played both. I was a Pro Evo player for the best part of a decade before that ISS Pro Evolution. And essentially that's what happened. But in the early days, it didn't matter as much because the technology wasn't quite there. So having the authentic kits didn't really make too much of a difference because you couldn't really make it out up until, I'd say, the PS2 or PS3 era. So we're talking early 2000s. That's when that became a bigger deal. And I think most people were happy playing Pro Evo provided it was the better game. And Konami, which created Pro Evolution Soccer, they eventually did get a deal with FIFA Pro, so they got the real names. They did get some licenses. They got international teams. They had deals with Liga, La Liga, Serie A, and some individual clubs. And what happened is EA turned the screw. They basically, the financial power. So on the licensing side, they tied up a lot of these leagues to exclusivity, so Konami couldn't touch them. For example, the EA has a very long-running deal with the Premier League, which basically means that Konami could only have 2 clubs from the Premier League if it negotiated with them directly to include them in their games. So, for example, Pro Evo 6 just had Manchester United, it had Arsenal. The rest were those names. So it did have some licenses. EA decided to close the gap. The second part is EA has so much money that it could devote it to development, and it actually started to change its game so it was more like Pro Evo. It also hired quite a few. There was also another game called LMA Manager, which was a console-based management game, which it was never threatening Football Manager or a Championship Manager, but it did well on console, and basically they hired a lot of people from that to improve the overall experience. So EA just used its financial might to effectively squeeze out the competition. It's so expensive to create a a football video game in terms of licensing, in terms of development. It takes years to even get to the point. There are people trying to do it now, and they're having to take a different tack. So Pro Evo just eventually couldn't compete. It did close the gap with licensing to an extent, but by then I think it was already the ship had already sailed to a degree, and it's now completely pivoted to esports and free to play with eFootball and trying something completely different.
And now talking about the business model a little bit. So one of the and also indeed a bit of the gaming component, I suppose, but one of the real turning points in terms of this being even bigger, I guess, revenue generator, as well as a gaming property that people would live and breathe every single day, was the shift for EA Sports to turn the game into something that you could play online, right, and play against friends, and I guess shift away from the seasonality of a new game release every year to have this ability to play online against your friends and always be on with this game all the time. So there was never really a downtime for a game like this, which I think hearing people like Peter Moore, I think was the EA Sports CEO at the time, talk about this. He also talked about how much that was really a game changer to see the rate of consumption skyrocket, and also their ability to understand what consumption behavior was like almost in real time was a hugely valuable commodity for them. Do you have a sense of how impactful that was from a business perspective? Were they able to generate a lot more revenue as a result of that, or was it just that the game was more valuable to the users?
It's a bit of both, really. So, as you say, most sports games have or at least traditionally had a cyclical element to it, where a new game is released each year. You have new gameplay updates. You would have up-to-date teams, and typically over every year period, all that development would go into it. Now, with modern consoles and being able to connect to the internet, that impacted things in two ways. One is, as you say, players can play against friends or strangers online. And the second is you can issue updates throughout that season. It's not what ships on the disc isn't the final product. I know PCs have had patches for years, but if on the PlayStation 2, that was kind of it really. You had the disc, and that was it for a year. So you've hit the nail on the head in two ways. Firstly, the most traditional way to play a soccer game was the career mode, and of course, again, that would eventually have a finite amount of pill. You've done everything in the game. Being able to play online and in different modes, that is able to extend the lifespan of that title. It's always new challenges, always new things to play. And the second is you can release extra modes. So most people now play Ultimate Team in FIFA. So that's the main way most people play FIFA. So just I'm trying to summarize this simply. Basically, it's a bit like football stickers, where you unlock packs of cards. You receive cards. They're usually random. There is a marketplace where you can buy and sell them as well. And you're trying to put the best possible team from various players from around the world of soccer, and there's various challenges, and there's parameters in how these players will play well together. So if they're same nationality, same club, they've got links. The more they play together, the more chemistry they have. That's the binding mechanism in this. And what Ultimate Team is almost a microcosm of how the industry has changed. It was initially a paid piece of downloadable content as an extra mode. It was then included as part of the game because EA realized that people were spending real money on this. They were buying in-game currency to buy packs because they're trying to get the best possible team. And then eventually it was just, it became the main part of the game. And EA is fairly, I would say, unique in many ways in that it benefits from both the cyclical nature of the release schedule and the ongoing service element, because each year you pay £50, $60, whatever, for the new FIFA game, or EA Sports FC 24, and you then spend money in Ultimate Team. So they're getting additional revenue and they're getting upfront costs from it. So they now have a way to engage fans throughout the season, keep them engaged through new challenges, new Ultimate Team has different limited edition items, new in-game squad building challenges, and you've got a way to get more revenue. The relationship, the financial relationship doesn't end when they pay the money to get the game. It continues throughout the year, and then unlike what we call live service games or games as a service, which are continuous, it's the same thing year after year. Everything resets each year with FIFA, so you have to spend more money and more time to build your team up again. So it's got a unique business model. It's almost having its cake and eat it.
It is a really unique model, and I think the reason I wanted to talk about some of this side of things before we dig a little into the now is because I think you can start to get a sense of some of the things that sports has been trying to do around driving incremental revenues and average revenue per user around memberships and accessibility through season tickets. There's some things that kind of mimic what's been happening in gaming for some time, and that's been really well received because fans absolutely love it because they're able to get something of what they perceive as really valuable, right? I.e., like the buying the packs and decks. I go onto YouTube, and there are hundreds of influencers, if not more, who just do filming where they record, they buy packs of these like decks to get them to pull players out of those decks. Like you're talking about collectibles, and like we've talked about the NFT craze and so forth. That's what they've already been doing for some time, and those people get thousands and hundreds of thousands of subscribers of people just watching people open up decks for these Ultimate Team games. So it is a huge ecosystem that I think sometimes people in sports don't really understand the significance and scale of it and how it is self-fulfilling because of what happens on by influencers, gaming influencers, basically outside of the space. So, it's a whole other beast than just say someone buying a game every year. That's for sure. And in fact, I think people who are buying those packs, I remember hearing, I think it was Robbie Young who heads up what's that company called?
Animica Brands.
And thank you. And he was saying that they launched an F1 blockchain based game, and the level of spend once they were on the game was 10x, 100x what they would pay to play the game itself when it was the F1 game, even though they closed it down. And the point is that once you get them in and they're bought into it, they will spend whatever very comfortably at a click of a button. And that's really what gaming has been successful at, where sports has really struggled. And indeed, the sports media industry has struggled a lot with.
I mean, weirdly, Ultimate Team is almost a really good use case for NFTs, but of course that would mean they couldn't release those cyclical games and reset the game world each year. And because you'd be able to transfer your items from one year to another. I mean, I do wonder if we'll see EA eventually go down that live service route where they just basically have a single platform. It might reset each season or something like that, but they don't have they don't have the upfront cost. It's free to play. It'd be interesting to see if they ever get to that point, they decide the opportunity is greater. But you're absolutely right in terms of the engaged ecosystem that EA has. This is, for many people, it includes people that aren't even interested in football, full stop. Like, it's people that are just interested in football as a video game, and they're learning through they're learning about the world of football through that, which I'm sure we'll get onto is why it was such a good thing for FIFA, and that's what they may have lost. But we're seeing a lot of sport mimic what games have been doing for years. This is just one area. We've seen it in broadcasting. I don't know if you've noticed, but broadcasts look a lot more like video games these days to me, particularly with the cinematic cameras. It used to be the other way around. EA used to try and make it look as much like a television broadcast as possible. Now I've lost track now. Is it art imitating life, imitating art? I'm not really sure what's happening, but it's definitely the way. It's incredibly influential, and I think if there's one thing I would say is I think the sports industry for a little while has been, if not snobby about video games, it's been ambivalent to the power that they have. They've seen it as a licensing opportunity, that a throwaway thing to get a small bit of revenue. I mean, look at the slew of licensed games in the 80s and 90s. They were just, people just stick their name and stick their face on it. They don't really care once the product goes out. But now I think everyone's seeing the power of them as an engagement tool, seeing the power of them to learn things from business models. And they really are part of the sports industry now. I don't think anyone can really ignore that.
Absolutely. And I think just now we're going to move on to a bit more of the business. But I think one thing that is missing on people's radars is people, particularly older generation, see gaming as almost like a thing for hermits, basically. People that hide away, lock themselves in a room and never talk to anyone. But actually, gaming is one of the most social things that a modern day gamer can do. They're constantly talking with friends, playing with friends, connecting with new people. They see it as almost like a social activity as much as being in a room and gaming, which I do think is another factor that people are sometimes lost on. But let's move things on, Steve, because I'm conscious we spent a good time scene setting here. But let's talk a little bit more about where FIFA and EA fell apart. What happened? Why is the FIFA game no more, basically? And why did EA decide to go down this different direction?
I'll give you the short answer first, and it's money. A bit more of a longer answer is they failed to renegotiate their licensing deal, and there are a couple of reasons for that. I'd say the straw that broke the camel's back was financial. Essentially, FIFA wanted more money. That I believe they wanted to double their the revenue we're getting for that, which I believe they were get over 10 years they were getting a billion, and I think they wanted more than that. And EA, I think, were already reluctant to do that, given that they felt that they weren't getting a lot from that license in terms of intellectual property, as we've discussed. It was the World Cup the men's World Cup every 4 years, women's World Cup every 4 years, which is what's now been added to the game. And the terms of that license agreement severely restricted what they could do commercially and from a developmental point of view. So their license was for one single category, and I think it was video game simulation. That was what they had. They couldn't branch out into other areas. So if they wanted to go into NFT games, they couldn't. They can go to other genres of gaming. They couldn't, and they couldn't strike their own commercial partnerships. So they'd basically be beholden to whatever the license owner had. That was FIFA to, for example, a World Cup level, or they couldn't have competing arrangements. I think the only exception would be if it was with an individual league. So EA, after spending years creating this ecosystem, creating this brand loyalty, for many people, FIFA was now a video game. It was not a sports organization, and I think EA felt that this ecosystem, this brand loyalty, and what you said before about having this data on their users, meant it felt confident it could go it alone, and so it decided not to renew its agreement. Though I think it was the final game was FIFA 23, which included the men's and the women's World Cup in there. And EA decided we're going to create our own brand, go a slightly different direction, and they decided they would strengthen the relationships with the individual competitions. So the Premier League, La Liga, etc. They've signed a deal with UEFA for the European Championships. They already have the men's and women's Champions League, and they decided to strengthen that and become more part of the game. So it's not just licensing; it's more of a wider platform. It's got the title sponsorship of La Liga, so it's EA Sports La Liga. You see the EA Sports FC logo all over matches now, whether it's broadcast graphics, I don't even know what you call them, but when the players come on the pitch and someone takes the ball from a ceremonial stand, that'll have EA Sports FC on it. It's on referee shirts. So EA just felt confident that it could go it alone. My suspicion is, this is pure my opinion, it probably would have preferred not to. It preferred not to rock the boat and given what was what generates billions of dollars for it. But I think it felt the combination of that lack of freedom, the opportunity cost, and also the increased financial demands, decided, what, I think this is time. And that's essentially why it was ostensibly a financial decision, but I think there have been a bit of tension bubbling under the surface for a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I have been most interested in since is those deals they've been doing with all the other leagues. I found them interesting because they're very eclectic in terms of the mix of I've used that word twice in one podcast. Let's either keep it alive in future pods as well. But it's a diverse range of things, right? You talk about La Liga, where they are everywhere. They are title sponsors. They are on all the respective kits and so forth across the coverage. Why do you think they decided to do that? Do you think that was more of a marketing investment, actually, like, hey, we want to create awareness of EAFC now moving forward, rather because they could have just done the deals, paid a lot of money, paid a premium, and done the deals for the rights to have those sports properties? Do you think it was very much just in addition to that, hey, we want to really hit the ground running? So we think that the best way to market a football video game is to just extend our partnership with them to be basically more of a traditional consumer-led sponsorship on top of that base layer of licensing?
I think it's because EA doesn't see itself as adjacent to the sports industry. I think it sees itself as part of the sports industry, and by having its branding within the world of football, people are going to see it as synonymous. It's everywhere. It is going to drive awareness of that brand. People are going to know. I mean, I would say most FIFA players would know it's going to be EA Sports FC. I don't think that was really going to be too much. I didn't think it was going to be too much of a brand awareness issue, but it's now seen as part and parcel of the game. EA wants to be seen as, I guess, a core pillar of football. It wants to be almost like, you watch, you play, play the game on the field, but then you also play the game. It wants to be a platform for football. It doesn't want to be just a license holder. It wants to be something in itself. So I think it's all about just strengthening those ties. You're right. It could have just renewed its license agreement, got the teams, got the kit, etc. But the other thing is, these leagues want to be part of this game. They know the value in being able to reach this audience, engage them, and also there's the degree of data sharing as well, which strengthens both businesses. Every EAFC player is asked to name their favorite club. That is hugely important. We see all of these inflated figures about clubs' global fan bases. Oh, we've got 1 billion fans. I mean, I'm not, I don't know how multiple clubs can have 1 billion fans, around the world. But these are based on metrics like social followers, which aren't necessarily an indication of fandom. So that's hugely valuable. There's marketing opportunities for both sides, and it's almost got to the point where if you are not involved in this game as much as possible, you could miss out to another league. The Premier League isn't as much as La Liga, so it's in the club's interest to make sure that they have. This might sound quite trivial, but the outside of their ground digitally recreated in the game, so to immerse fans as much as possible. So it's both sides. I think both EA wants to be seen as part of football, and the clubs and the leagues now they are under no illusions about the value of this in terms of fan engagement.
I think it's a really, really good point. And you think about the power balance, let's say, that has ebbed and flowed between, say, EA Sports and maybe FIFA over the years. And FIFA was in a position they wanted to gain the most power and dictate those terms and obviously be very narrow on what licensing rights EA Sports had to play with. Well, now that whole dynamic with EA Sports and indeed the industry has completely changed, because now they are funding and sponsoring and supporting all these leagues in addition to those licensing deals. So now EA Sports can really dictate some of those terms. I'm sure they'll do it in at least initially in the right way, but it gives them a whole new position of market power and strength when they previously have just been in licensing arrangements, which means they just get what they're given and that's it. So it will be interesting to see how much they lean into that and how much they grow their influence on what happens on the pitch, or indeed at least in those stadiums you talked about.
I think one thing that's going to be fascinating to see is if FIFA decides that it needs to have a stronger presence in EAFC and how those negotiations go. We don't have a men's World Cup until 2026, but it's in North America, and who's going to get the rights to that tournament? Is FIFA going to do something itself, or is it going to try and get that game get its tournament into EAFC? Same with that expanded Club World Cup. Great way of reaching these fans, making fans aware, driving up the importance of that would be a global video game. So yeah, I think that is going to be fascinating, the power dynamics of those negotiations. Although the fact that FIFA arguably let probably the best deal in the sports industry slip through its fingers makes me think they're perhaps not aware of the power of EAFC as a video game just yet, but they should be.
So I want to talk about monetization and how EA Sports is now able to unlock more revenue than we talked about before. The main and obvious bit for me would be around in-game advertising. You've seen, for those that do watch a little bit more what's happening in different gaming spheres, Roblox is probably synonymous with doing a lot more brand partnerships where people can create their own spaces in the metaverse, which is bringing a term that's not used as much in this day and age, but I think will continue to make a resurgence again. But Roblox is a great example of someone who's partnering with a lot of brands to create these different sort of experiences in this virtual world. But indeed, there is even organizations that I've heard of that just sell on-pitch advertising in games, and now that wasn't able to be done in the FIFA version because of all the rights restrictions that were in place. Now esports, I guess, has free reign there, right, to sell to who they kind of want to, subject to the licensing agreements that they have in place with the leagues.
Yep. So again, because we live in this age of internet connected consoles, they can have these agreements. They could be for one weekend, they could be for a week, for 2 weeks, and this is slightly off topic, but there was a game called Actua Soccer 3 many years ago on the original PlayStation, and the developers signed a sponsorship deal with Bean, the Ultimate Disaster movie, and so that was in there for the whole year, increasingly losing relevance. And of course, that's just not something that would happen today. You can. There's other things in-game items. You can start selling those special kits. Footballs. I mean, EA told me that that they have a great relationship with Adidas. They love working with Adidas, but they also want to work with Nike and have their items in there and driving awareness that way. And you mentioned metaverse environments. I mean, one thing that I'm thinking of, I don't know, again, I'm going down memory lane, but if you remember a couple of the Nike adverts in the past, like that 3-on-3 football competition on the ship with Eric Cantona as the referee, why could you not recreate that game inside EAFC and create that as an activation? And I should really be charging for that idea. I think that's a really good one. I'd love that. You get icon cards in Ultimate Team, for example. But it's not just pitchside advertising. Again, we're looking at other ways. So Amazon is a partner in this. So it comes up on the I guess what you call the broadcast graphics. So it comes up periodically. They're able to do that as well, advertising for Twitch. And I think the most interesting way that they've used this new freedom so far is a deal with PepsiCo, which basically sees a tie-up with Pepsi. There's a sponsorship element to it. There's in-game activations, but then EAFC branding is appearing on bottles around the world. So you go into a chiller cabinet and you're being alerted to the fact that EAFC exists, and you can get in-game items if you buy Pepsi Max over Coke Zero. Of course, Coca-Cola has a very long relationship with FIFA, so that's a deal that previously would have been impossible. And also, the other thing to say about Pepsi is that I always think they're probably the best at. I don't know what the term is, but they don't have sponsorship deal with World Cups, but they have those adverts before each tournament and individual ambassadors. So they make you think
it's not quite ambush marketing, but it's
quite guerrilla marketing. It's almost like hanging on.
Yeah.
So not quite ambush or guerrilla marketing, but it's near it. So again, that's new ways that they can do this freedom, and they're going to create it's new revenue opportunities. And again, it's about creating this platform for the football industry that goes beyond just licensing video game rights.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've played the NBA 2K basketball game, and I haven't played it for a couple of years. But one of the things that kids get in the road of these things, right? I don't have as much disposable time as I used to. But one of the things that stood out for me is they have things like the Gatorade Center, where you have to go to get rehydrated to play with you get tired and stuff like that. And they also have a lot of brand related stuff. They even have in the one game I saw in the career mode, they had Nike agents and Adidas agents in the game that you have to be doing deals with, as well as the kit and clothing. So it's a bit like, you think about, for those that aren't familiar with the gaming space, think about like movies and you see like product placement. It's a bit like that, but actually on steroids. It's much more methodical about how they're integrated into the game. It's quite immersive how they bring that to life, and really, really interesting. So definitely an area that makes those brand experiences, takes them a whole another level from anything else I can think of.
Well, this is purely speculative, but the NBA has always been known as a more progressive institution, especially when it comes to technology. So maybe that's the terms of 2K's license, that they don't have to be beholden to, because their partnership is with Adidas, or it has been. Obviously, Nike is hugely important in the basketball space, so they kind of understand what they're doing, and they know that to create that level of realism, that these things need to be included as well, and it makes, I guess, I think it makes financial sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of things to wrap up on here, but one thing I wanted to talk about is obviously what FIFA's doing now. So a lot of people are expecting FIFA to do something. You don't just walk away from hundreds of millions a year in licensing deal and in sort of and brand exposure they were getting from the deal they had with EA Sports, and not try and mitigate some of those losses. So what are some of the moves they've made, Steve, to try and, I guess, no doubt bring some other games to the mix that they think may compete with EAFC, or are they taking a completely different approach?
They're taking a different approach. They have been spurred into action, and I think you can look at its video game strategy as part of a wider digital shift at FIFA and its direct-to-consumer approach. We saw that with the launch of FIFA Plus, which is this global platform for football, gives them an opportunity to reach markets. Isn't a broadcast deal, also gives I guess, minor leagues or leagues that aren't important in some countries, a global platform. So it forms part of that wider ecosystem, which is obviously them experiment with metaverse. They're looking at Web3 initiatives. So they've not created anything analogous to what EA Sports FC is, nor have they partnered with another company. That's partly because of what I mentioned, the associated cost of creating a rival is hugely, it's very difficult, and also eFootball does exist, but I don't know if that would be the right move for it just yet, given eFootball's ambitions, and also probably wouldn't be in a position to make that financial contribution. So they've been focusing on metaverse experiences. They've been working with Upland. They're working with Roblox. They're looking at mobile games. They've launched an AI powered game, which the name of which escapes me, but they're working with a company called Futureverse on that. So they're doing lots of different things, and interesting. Some of these things are things I think that EA wasn't allowed to do in terms of its license. So I think they're looking to see what they can do with that. So they're not competing directly, but I did mention facetiously that they might not be aware of the value of video games. They are. I just don't think they realize how good their deal was with EA, and perhaps there was room for more compromise there. But they're trying different things, trying to reach fans in a different way. And EA have released a mobile game, but look, when you're targeting consumers around the world, the best way to do that is through a mobile phone, right? There's billions and billions of mobile connections around the world. So I think looking at those kinds of experiences, those mobile first experiences, more free to play rather than charging for it. And again, just trying to cement those direct engagement routes between FIFA and the consumer, which is also going through streaming and Web3.
So to wrap on this sort of topic, I'm just curious to get your take on this. Is this, Infantino is in the news a lot when he speaks, normally for things that he probably shouldn't have said, but he's been running FIFA for quite a while now. But do you think that a lot of people, and they copped a lot of scrutiny over this deal and the loss of this deal and this relationship, do you think this is a huge drop ball, a huge mistake by FIFA not to continue working with EA Sports? Or do you think actually, you know what, it's not that bad? They will find ways to bridge the gap, and from a brand exposure, yes, they lose that brand appeal, but it doesn't matter. Like, do you think it's a real big miss, or actually they'll get over this and then pretend like it never happened?
There are a lot of smart people at FIFA. I think the launch of FIFA Plus in particular was one of the most exciting things that the governing body has done. I think it was a really smart move. Really just they're quite impressed, especially with how they conceptualized and delivered that platform. So they are capable of being able to judge things and create digital products people want to use. I think ultimately it will prove a mistake. I think they had a really good deal where they were being paid a lot of money for doing or offering very little. And I actually think the bigger loss will be that brand exposure rather than that direct revenue. Of course, they would like to have the revenue, but I feel in terms of making FIFA relevant to younger audiences, having that being synonymous with the world's biggest video game, effectively, that was just something that is not going to come around again. I think they'll definitely find ways to engage fans. Like I said before, I think that, that mobile devices are a great opportunity. They do have the World Cup as this massive platform. They are trying to build a Club World Cup, which will offer further opportunities. So I think they will have something that will appeal to fans. I think it's a strategic misstep that perhaps there wasn't quite the realization that FIFA was not as important to EA Sports as perhaps they thought it was. They thought they could increase revenue without offering more, and ultimately, I think it will be a strategic misstep. I think we'll have to see what FIFA do in the long term. But as I said, yes, I think there's a huge opportunity cost there, and that might be bigger than the financial terms. Although the financial terms were significant, we can't just gloss over 100 million a year. That's or reported, 100 million a year. That's a huge amount for anyone. But when the World Cup makes as much money as it does, and its other initiatives, it's not quite as big as it could be.
Yeah, I agree. I would be interested to see what FIFA do end up doing. I think it is a misstep by them to not make this deal happen. I've been very intrigued on how Infantino has reacted to also what happened with like the broadcasting around the Women's World Cup and trying to negotiate in public almost and tell people, almost shame the broadcasters. I just think maybe he needs a bit more support on those negotiations and how to approach these deals than perhaps he's had in the past.
I think funny enough, you should mention that. I think there are analogies with how they negotiate those rights deals, and in terms of the negotiations, they perhaps they had an idea of what those rights were worth, but weren't able to necessarily prove it at the time. It may happen in the future with the Women's World Cup, and we could see bigger bids next time. Again, another missed opportunity, the Women's World Cup, in terms of how they went to market with that. Particularly, I was speaking from the UK. They could have had weeks of promotion across various programs. They didn't have that, so if they'd gone for, if they negotiated deals earlier, then they would have had that and perhaps would have got more money next time. So it remains to be seen. But back to video games, yes, I think maybe they do need to have, perhaps more people in the room, perhaps able to explain these things. And the final thing I would say is it's also really good to have EA as a partner. I think you're looking at what they're doing with motorsport now. So EA bought Codemasters, which had the license to both Formula One and World Rally Championship. Now that's going to take F1 to another level as part of its ongoing, well-documented growth. But for a sport like World Rally, to have EA on board, that's massive in terms of cross-promotion abilities. I don't think a lot of people do necessarily. Rally is necessarily, it's a minority sport. It's quite difficult to watch, to cover on TV. It doesn't quite translate. It's a fantastic sport. I really like it, but it doesn't really translate to TV as well as it could beyond that core audience. They're going to have this video game platform to reach entirely new audiences, people who, might not really know about Rally or remember the old games or something like that. I think that's a huge thing for WRC and what it's trying to do.
Big time. And I remember playing that Sega Rally, I think the game was, in the arcades when I was growing up, which was actually so good. And I was a terrible driver, but I'm using some of those skills to drive over here in Jamaica, because you have to drive like a rally driver to survive here. But look, Steve, that's been a great sort of deep dive into the business of gaming, and particularly what's been happening with EA Sports and with FIFA. I, for one, just interested to see what happens next from FIFA's perspective, and indeed just in the sports gaming space. It feels like whilst there are some big major titles that exist now, EAFC seem to have hit the ground running. It'll be interesting to see how much they share with regards to the performance and how it does compare and contrast with the days of the FIFA game. But one thing's for sure, sports needs to continue to look at the gaming space closely and see how we can leverage the relationship gaming has with its audiences, and not think it's all the other way around. But look, that is all we've got time for. Thanks again, Steve, for joining us. And Steve, how can some of our listeners find you on various platforms?
Well, you can find me at McCaskill on X, the social media network formerly known as Twitter, and I'm on LinkedIn, where I post a selection of my content. So feel free to follow me on there.
And all of Steve's explainers are obviously published on the SportsPro website, so make sure you do check out those things. Both some things part of the SportsPro Plus membership, but indeed some things are also available to all who go onto the platform. So that's it for us. Thanks very much for listening, and look forward to speaking with you all next week. Bye for now.
Before you go, myself and Nick would just like to thank you for tuning into this episode of Streamtime. If you found the episode insightful, please make sure you like and subscribe on whichever platform you listen to. As a growing podcast, we'd greatly appreciate your support in sharing or writing a review. Ultimately, we want this podcast to not only entertain you, but also hopefully help you navigate the digital sports landscape. If you have any feedback on previous episodes or any topics and speakers you'd like to hear from in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find myself and Nick Meacham on LinkedIn or on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @SportsProChris1. Nick can be found @SportsProNick. Of course, if you want to stay fully up to date on the sports business news cycle, please make sure to visit the SportsPro Media website or sign up to one of our several newsletters to make sure you don't miss anything. Once again, thank you, and we look forward to you joining us next week on the Streamtime podcast.